welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share 4 Skinwalker encounters, with all 4 coming from Navajo people. The Skinwalker is a part of the Navajo folklore, and it is amazing how they can immediately spot one and or know how to deal with one during an encounter. These 4 stories demonstrate just that, and it's a good thing they do know how to deal with one because these encounters could have gone terribly wrong if they didn't. Alright, let's get to the first story. The first story of this episode takes place near Window Rock, Arizona. Window Rock is located in Apache County in northeastern Arizona, just over the New Mexico state line. It serves as the seat of government and capital of the Navajo Nation, and has a population of approximately 2,500 people according to the 2020 census. Its main attraction is the natural window formation of sandstone carved out by wind erosion. Window Rock is also home to the Navajo Nation Museum, the Navajo Nation Zoological and Botanical Park, and the Navajo Nation Code Talkers World War II Memorial. The original poster, or OP, was on a delivery with his father, who owns and operates a delivery service out of Farmington, New Mexico. It's a small business that delivers smaller packages to the middle of nowhere that are too much of a hassle for a larger delivery company, according to the OP. He was 6 or 7 at the time of the events. His father had gotten a call for the delivery to the reservation at Window Rock, which is about 2 hours from Farmington. He was with his friend and his friend's girlfriend at the time. His father's friend, who is Navajo, has family in Window Rock he hasn't seen in a long time, so the OP's father suggested they all head out there together. He will bring his son, the OP, and while the friend and his girlfriend go see family, he will take his son to Window Rock. They were forced to take separate trucks due to the size of the freight his father was hauling, so the friend and his girlfriend followed the OP and his father. They used walkie-talkies to communicate during the trip. The delivery and his visit to Window Rock were uneventful, but what the OP says he will remember for the rest of his life was what happened on the way home. While they were riding down the old highway, somewhere between Window Rock and Gallup, New Mexico, they were riding past sandstone cliffs on the left and a huge field to the right, separated from the road by a barbed wire fence. They were taking it a bit slower because it had rained earlier in the day, leaving the road slick. They drove over a hill, and at the bottom they saw what looked like a very big dog sitting in the middle of the road. The OP's father radioed to his friend who was following behind them and asked if he saw the huge dog. His friend immediately started yelling back over the radio, "That is not a dog. Speed up right now and hit it." The OP describes him as sounding hysterical. He continued to scream, "Hit it. You have to hit it. Please. Please hit that effing thing right now." After hearing his friend plead with him, the OP's father sped his truck up. When they got closer, they got a better look at the thing in the road. It was covered in brown fur that was wiry and matted down and looked as if it had dried blood all over it. It was facing the cliffs, but when the headlights hit it, the beast turned its head and looked at the truck bearing down on it. The OP describes the face as looking like the mixture of a bear and a man. It had a twisted, distorted look on its face as if it was in pain. Being this close, the OP and his father realized how massive this thing really is. It was on its haunches, but its shoulders were just about even with the hood of the truck. Just as they were about to hit it, the creature lets out a gargled scream before leaping toward the field and landing on the other side of the barbed wire fence. It leaps again and disappears from sight. His father's friend came back on the radio and told them they need to keep driving and they needed to get out of there. He kept urging the OP's father to drive faster, repeating it over and over. By the time they reached the outskirts of Gallup, New Mexico, they were flying down the highway. They got pulled over, so his father's friend pulled over too. The cop, who was also Navajo, as trained, is wary of this and asked his friend why he also pulled over. He tells the officer that they just saw a Skinwalker and has been following them. The officer is visibly shaken up by this, mutters something about a warning, hurries back to his car and takes off. The OP's father and friend did the same. Nothing else happened that night, but his father's friend would not let them leave his home when they returned without taking a Navajo totem meant to keep Skinwalkers away. This is the region of the US where the majority of the Skinwalker encounters are documented, and it seems that no one out there, especially the Navajo, are messing around when it comes to these things. The friend immediately told the OP's father to hit the perceived dog, and the officer wasted no time getting out of there when he found out what they were running from. From what I've read and heard, most Navajo won't even acknowledge or talk about Skinwalkers for fear of attracting them. The next story comes from a poster who doesn't say where the incident took place, but that he and his uncle, who he was with at the time, are both Navajo. He was younger when the encounter took place and was on his way home from chopping and gathering firewood for his grandmother with his uncle. Dusk had settled over the woods as they drove down the old dirt road at about 30 miles an hour. The entire ride, the original poster had the terrible feeling that he was being watched. He began to turn and look out the passenger side window when his uncle shouted, "Don't!" He didn't look, but froze, his heart pounding in his chest when the tapping came at his window. His uncle sped up and began to pray in their native language. The OP wasn't quite sure what was going on, but at one point he thought they were safe before the back of the truck dipped down as if something heavy had landed in the bed. His uncle kept saying, "Look at me, don't turn away," over and over. Then the OP heard tapping at the window again, this time from behind him. He started having trouble breathing and felt like he was going to cry. A long few minutes passed and the truck jerked again, this time as if something heavy jumped out of the bed. His uncle inspected their surroundings then and sighed. The worst of it was over. They sat in silence for a moment before his uncle looked at him and said he would ask his father to do a prayer for them in the morning, so the evil will forget their faces. He said this in Navajo. All the OP could do was curl up in his seat and stare at the radio for the rest of the ride home, listening to his uncle sing an old prayer. The OP later called his uncle after having a nightmare about that night. His uncle was happy to talk to him until he settled down. He told the OP he didn't see any faces, just eyes. They were like brake lights you see on the road at night. They were watching the OP. He was again speaking in Navajo when he told his nephew this. Before the call ended, the OP made a joke about him not slamming on brakes when the thing was in the back of the truck. His uncle did not laugh. He sat in silence for a few seconds before answering, because it wasn't alone. It's a good thing his uncle stayed calm in that situation. Well, about as calm as he could, probably. To be able to keep the truck on the road while all that was going on took a tremendous amount of composure. I wonder what made the Skinwalkers just up and leave them alone. Perhaps it was them not showing them any attention. In any case, they got very lucky. The next story comes from a poster whose aunt had a terrifying encounter with a Skinwalker while partying in a van with her friends. The original poster doesn't say if he is full-blooded Navajo, but his mother is, and her hometown is on the Navajo reservation. He does not say where exactly this story takes place, just that his aunt was on the reservation during the encounter. He would take road trips with his family to his mother's hometown. During the trips to the reservation, he would ask his mother to tell him about the Skinwalkers. He never had any encounters himself, but remembered every story his mother told him, especially the one about how his aunt had a horrifying experience one night while partying with her friends. When she was younger, his aunt was quite the partier. Not having anywhere to go and do so on the reservation, she and her friends would pile into the back of an old van, drive to the middle of nowhere, and drink and have fun. They had gone about their normal routine on the night of their encounter, parking the van and going about their partying when they heard what sounded like rocks being thrown at the van. They stopped and quieted down, listening and wondering what could be doing that, when the rocks finally stopped hitting the van. Moments later, something big landed on the roof. Everyone panicked and hurried to lock the doors. His aunt jumped in the front seat and tried to start the van, but the old van's engine wouldn't turn over. The thing on the roof was either banging on top of the van or jumping up and down, freaking everyone out as chaos ensued. The van still wouldn't start. That's when his aunt saw a hand reach down from the roof with very long nails and scratch the windshield before whatever it was jumped off. His aunt's friends were still freaking out, yelling at her to go. All the while, she was still trying to start the van. Then, something walked up to the driver's side window and stared at her, inches away, nothing separating them but the glass. She quickly jumped into the back seat and started praying for her life. A few painstaking minutes passed and the Skinwalker finally seemed to leave. The OP's aunt jumped back in the front seat and the van blessedly started up and she got them out of there. That would have to be the worst feeling in the world, to not be able to start your car when something like that is happening. I couldn't imagine the panic that must have set in not only for the person trying to start the car, but everyone else too. I wish we had gotten a more detailed description of the Skinwalker when it came up to the window, if she even looked at it, that is. I don't know that I would have been able to. It seemed to want to terrorize them, which it definitely succeeded at, more so than anything else. I'm not sure why it didn't try to get into the van and what caused it to flee, but it seemed to have done so when the OP's aunt started praying. What do you think? The final story of this episode comes from a poster who is Navajo, but grew up away from the Navajo Nation and has always been skeptical about skinwalkers, even though his mother told him a story of how she saw one when she lived with his grandparents back in the 80s. She described seeing a big black dog with dirty fur, a twisted noodle-like front leg, and unnatural burnt orange eyes that glowed softly, standing under the streetlight at the end of their driveway. The original poster doubted his mother's story, but never voiced his opinion. Well, his doubts would soon be put to rest when he visited his grandparents, who lived in Shiprock, New Mexico. Shiprock is located in San Juan County, which makes up the upper northwest corner of the state. The county borders Colorado to the north, Arizona to its west, and its northwestern tip meets the southwestern tip of Utah. Shiprock is located in the northwestern part of the county, and as of the 2020 census has a population of 7,718 people. It is aptly named after the nearby Shiprock rock formation. The OP and his family had gone to the Navajo Nation Fair and walked to his grandparents' home at approximately 9 p.m., where they sat up until about 2 a.m. catching up. During this time, he blurted out the question, "Are skinwalkers real?" His grandmother, disturbed by the question, semi-yelled at him that he should not speak about such things. Shortly thereafter, his grandparents went to bed, and after his mother scolded him for asking that question, his aunt told him that they are real all right, then told him about the screaming outside her home in Farmington, New Mexico, just a few nights prior. He let the subject drop, and everyone went to bed. Not long after, the OP was the only one awake, lying in his bed thinking about skinwalkers, and if he would encounter one while on the reservation. According to him, it is taboo just thinking about them, as that can supposedly attract them, just as speaking about them also can. It was a nice night, so they were sleeping with the windows open. Each window had a screen to keep the bugs from getting in. He was about to doze off when he began hearing movement outside the trailer. He got up and slowly made his way to the kitchen window. All the inside lights were off, and the only light came from the front porch light. This gave him a sense of security, as hopefully if anything was outside, it wouldn't be able to see him peeking out. He hesitated, but his curiosity got the best of him, and he looked out the window. All he could see was the dirt on the ground lit by the front porch light, the cars, and 2 metal trash cans standing by the road. He dismissed the sound as a stray cat or something and turned to go back to bed when a loud, distorted scream broke the silence. The scream was very close. Fear washed over him as he turned and looked back out the window to see a figure resembling a coyote staring at the window from behind the cars. It stood just out of the light's reach. He described it as looking wrong and giving off an evil vibe. It had gray fur that was disheveled and soft glowing red-orange eyes. He ran back to the bedroom as a putrid stench that smelled like rotting meat hit his nose. He immediately woke up his mother, who was annoyed due to the late hour and was trying to tell her something was outside. She told him it was probably just a stray animal, as there were a lot of stray animals on the reservation. Finally, the OP screamed at her that there was some Blair Witch stuff happening outside, and this got her attention. That's about the time the noises started back up outside. Another dreadful scream filled the night, and it sounded like something was thrashing around. His mother got up and they both went over to the window, where they saw the unnatural coyote-like creature walking toward the front door with a limp while dragging its back leg. It started scratching on the door while making a weird muffled moaning sound. His mother went and woke up his father, and they began yelling in Navajo at the creature, saying it was not welcome there and to go away. It didn't take long for everyone in the trailer to wake up and come down the hall. The OP's mother turned to look at them and could only say Skinwalker while pointing at the front door. Meanwhile, the noises continued outside. Luckily, his grandfather knew exactly what to do. He retrieved his handgun and a bag of ashes. He used the ashes to coat a few bullets before loading them into the gun. With the now loaded firearm, he went straight to the front door while yelling in Navajo. The OP says that whatever his grandfather was saying was way too fast for him to understand. When he reached the front door, he flung it open and fired at the creature twice. Unfortunately, though, the beast managed to escape before his grandfather could get it. His grandfather said, "That's the fastest one I've ever seen," before he came back inside. The OP, his parents, and his aunt were freaking out, worried that they were now targeted because it saw them and that it might come back the next night. His grandparents eventually calmed everyone down and they went to bed. The next morning, his grandparents called one of their neighbors and told them what happened. Apparently, he was a medicine man who used to conduct Navajo healing ceremonies to cure sickness. He came over and blessed each family member before blessing the grounds outside. I can't even begin to imagine how terrifying that experience must have been. Luckily, his grandfather knew exactly what to do. This isn't the first story I've heard where ash-coated bullets are used to fend off skinwalkers. The Navajo may not talk about skinwalkers, but they sure do know how to deal with one when facing them. I guess you would have to know if you lived on the reservation. And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.